Okay, I'm sitting down here with Mark Allen, who is an award-winning writer of multiple novels, and it turns out is also former U.S. Navy, as well as a screenwriter and a filmmaker. So there is a lot to talk about. You know, when we talk about creatives getting coffee, you fit the mold of that multi-purpose creative. So very interesting to hear what you have to say about all these things.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm looking forward to this.
Awesome, awesome. First off, I do want you to talk a little bit about I believe it's three novels that you've published so far, correct? Okay.
So
Could you
far, yeah.
yeah, could you give us a rundown of those? I believe one is a standalone and two are in a series, is that correct?
No, two are in a series. One is the beginning of its own series.
Ah, okay, okay.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about those.
The first novel that I published back in 2017 was Nocturnal, and it's about a vampire who lives in San Diego. I was in San Diego for 35 years of my life, so I knew San Diego like the back of my hand, and I wrote a story that not only had horror elements to it, but it also had elements of one of my favorite film genres and reading genres too, which is old hard-boiled detective film noir. And San Diego is a place that is rife with intrigue, especially at certain times of the year. It's cold, it's wet, marine layers come in at night and they just coat everything. It gets foggy. So every exposed surface is dripping with moisture and shadows moving in and out of the fog. And I mean, it's almost like being in a gothic tale, but you're living there. And I wanted to take that and make it so important to the story that the location actually became a character in the story itself. So that's where I started with Nocturnal. And I had promised myself a long time ago that I would never write a vampire story or a zombie story unless I could come up with a completely different hook, a way to approach and tell the story from a fundamentally different angle than what everybody else is doing. I got just, oh my God, I got so sick and tired of watching vampire films where either the vampire was a cardboard cutout caricature just to represent evil, the boogeyman, sort of like, you know, Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees with fangs, right? They were just representations of evil. The other thing I got so sick of was the lovelorn vampire who is pining away for a lost love or pining away for his or her lost humanity and just hating being a vampire. The other one, Romeo and Juliet, you know, whether you're talking about Underworld or whether you're talking about Twilight, what are these werewolves and vampires represent? Well, they're the Montagues and the Capulets. And anyone who's taken an English lit class can pick that out, within the first minute of seeing the film. And so I thought, I'm going to start my story with a vampire who's already been a vampire for, oh, about 100 years. And he's a very logical, methodical, very pragmatic man who is just going to go, yep, hey, this is what it is. This is what's on my plate. This is what life has dealt me. So be it. I'm just going to make the best of it, you know. And I had to I had to figure out how he made money. And I was going to
That
turn
always
him,
is the question, right? Because I do
yeah.
watch vampire movies and it's like, okay, it always seems like they're just inherently rich because they're vampires. You usually don't get into how they live for so long without any financial hardship.
And that's what makes Nocturnal um unique in that I set the groundwork um for the most recent story that I put up, but I set the groundwork there. I was going to make him a lawyer, but I thought the idea of a blood-sucking attorney would probably be just a little too on the nose, you know? So I
He can
had to,
only do trials when it's dark out.
yeah. So what I did was I made him a stockbroker, and he um, uses a laptop and a head rig and all this stuff. And he deals with Asian clients. So when he's awake, when it's nighttime in San Diego, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Macau, uh, the Nikkei index in Tokyo, they're all open. It's, that's their business day, right? So that was a nice little thing to put in there. That's how he makes his money. And because he's been alive for so long and because he understands how money really works, not the way people tell us it works, but the way it really works, he has built over time, over the decades, he has built quite the war chest. He's actually quite wealthy. Um, but he lives alone, lives in a two-bedroom apartment, just kind of hangs by himself. Um, he keeps himself sort of at arm's length from the rest of humanity. He does not want to involve himself in the affairs of man unless he absolutely has to, you know. And of course, that's the whole thing about the first book is him stepping away from his solitude to take care of some business because he is a deeply moral man in a very old fashioned, almost quaint nowadays way. Um, he can tell he has this like this ESP. It's part of his vampire survival kit, you know. Um, he can look at you and he can see your wave coming off of you in like an aura, you know, and it comes off you in these colors that only he can see. And through those colors, he can tell whether you're a good, fundamentally good person or whether you are an absolute scumbag. And if he can touch you, if he can make physical contact, no matter how slight, but it has to be skin to skin. He can't tap you on the shoulder with a shirt or a jacket on. It has to be skin to skin. But if he can touch you, he can see right into your soul, and he knows everything, everything, both good and bad. If you're if you're a guy coming home from working a 12-hour shift to so you can buy your kids some sneakers or something, he'll leave you alone. You're a single mom coming home from working two or three part-time jobs to keep a roof over your kids' head, carrying groceries, he'll leave you alone. In fact, if he sees you like that and he's in a good mood that night, he might even offer to carry your groceries for you. But if you're a criminal, if you're a lowlife, if you're a scumbag, if you're a thief, if you're a murderer, if you're a rapist, if you're a drug dealer, if you're an assassin, ooh, buddy, God help you if you cross this guy's path. because he's
You
not
don't really get like the ethical version of a vampire, especially as a protagonist in literature. That often usually vampires are portrayed as bad guys, right? So
right.
that is an interesting take.
And well, what I wanted to do was take a character that is ordinarily a villain. And in fact, my vampire would be the villain in anyone else's story, right? But what I've done is I've given him a rich history, which you learn in the book. You learn why he despises criminals so much, so much. He hates them with a passion, and you find out why that is. And what I've done is I've turned him into an anti-hero. He's like I say, he's very reluctant to get involved in these things. For him, people born, people live, people die, natural order of things. And if you're in with rough company, well, live by the sword, die by the sword as far as he's concerned. You get what you get. And but what happens in Nocturnal is something of such a morally egregious, catastrophic, egregiously event is about to take place. And it's just like, no, I can't let this happen. You know, the setup is an undercover cop has infiltrated a transnational drug cartel, and someone in the cops task force is a dirty cop himself and has told the people that this kid's a cop and they're going to kill him. And the vampire gets wind of this, and I never say how he gets wind of it. He just does. And he looks into it, sees what the deal is, understands who this cop really is, and not just to the crooks and the bad guys, but who this guy is to him. And he says, yeah, okay, let's just see about that. And the book takes off from there.
And then it dovetails into, I'm assuming, Just Before Dawn, which is the second one in the series.
Right. Just Before Dawn is the second book in the series. And it is, since I took the time to write another book in between, this book takes place 5 years after the events of Nocturnal. And, Vampire's gone back to his very quiet, anonymous life. He is spending a lot of time visiting with his granddaughter because she is aged, she's elderly, she has multiple body systems failing, and has a lot of age-related diseases and conditions, and he knows she does not have long, right? And he has offered to make her a vampire. And she has turned him down.
Hmm.
She doesn't want to be like him. She wants the natural order of things. She has grown up, she has lived her life, had what she considers a good life. She feels that she's had a good run and she's not afraid of dying. It just, to her, is just the natural order of things, and this is just how it works. And so she's good with it. And he, he loves his granddaughter dearly, but he also respects her choice, because ultimately, at the end of the day, it is her choice. It is all of our choices, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And his great great grandson, Reggie, is now the lead detective in his precinct. And his good friend Nick Castle has been promoted to the lieutenant of the district. And there's a a serial killer who is stalking San Diego's vampire goth nightclub scene, right? And the killer is leaving his kills to be found on purpose. And the only thing is that the victims have two tiny little puncture marks on their neck about 2 inches apart, and the blood is completely drained of their bodies. And so it mimics vampirism. And of course this case lands on Reggie's desk, right? And he and the lieutenant are talking about it, and the lieutenant says, "Look, I know your great great grandpa isn't the one doing this. Okay. This is not his style." and, and Reggie says, "You've seen what he does to the people that he feeds on." No. He says, my grandpa is messy, and all these people still have their arms and legs. This isn't him. You know, my vampire, when he feeds, he's a messy eater. He is going to make sure. I don't want to get too graphic on here because I don't know what your audience demographic is, but let's just
My,
say,
my my cousin watches this. He's 14 years old, so you know.
well, he there it's my books are graphically violent. Okay, they are because of my background. They are medically accurate
Mm,
in their depiction of violence. Some people say that I write extreme horror. No,
nah, no, not
I
quite.
I no, I don't. That is not what I do. I write medically accurate violence.
Mhm.
But that's not the point of the stories. The violence and everything else is there to serve my story, not be the point of it.
Mhm. Yeah, I was actually speaking with another author a couple weeks ago on the show by the name of Tobin Elliott, and he was talking about how some people call his work extreme horror because it is very dark and very descriptive in how violent it is. But to me, extreme horror is meant to evoke some sense of shock and awe just in and of itself, right? And that's
Yeah.
not what you're doing.
Yeah.
Having read some of Blood Red Moon myself,
Mm-hmm.
I can tell that that's not what you're trying to do. You're trying to tell a
Mm-hmm.
story, and you yourself are a storyteller. So I want to get a little bit into your screenwriting and your filmmaking background because
Okay.
even as you're speaking about your stories, you are really theatrical in how you describe them. So of course, I can tell you have a film background because I do the same thing when I talk about stories. Um, but first things first. You had about 2 decades of experience in the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
What was the transition between doing that and getting into screenwriting, filmmaking? Was it something you did while you were in the Navy? What did that look like?
Well, you have to go 52 years back in history to when I was 10 years old. I was in fourth grade at Eastside Elementary School in Jacksonville, Texas, a tiny town that at the time only had like 9,000 people in it, tiny little place, rural community, farming community. And we were given an assignment by our fourth grade teacher, and it was we had to write a story over the weekend. It could be on anything we wanted, but it had to be a short story fiction because that's what we'd been studying in English class. And I went home, and as I did on every Friday afternoon, throw the books down, turn the TV on because there was this one station out of Dallas that showed like the old Universal classic monster movies, the old black and white Lon Chaney and Boris Karloff movies. And every once in a while, they would show some of the Godzilla movies. And I went home that particular Friday, turned the TV on, and there's Godzilla, stomping all over Tokyo and breathing fire and everything. So I sat down on Sunday afternoon, getting ready to turn this in on Monday morning, and I wrote a 3-page story about Godzilla attacking Tokyo. Turned it in, and I got an A+ on the assignment. I had never gotten an A+ before. That plus was a big deal to me. And she had written at the bottom, great imagination. Even though my story was totally derivative, okay? And, copyright infringement. Oh, what I did was just horrible. But, when you're 10 years old, you don't understand trademark and copyright,
Oh
you
yeah,
just tell, you
everything's
just tell a
inspired by
story.
something, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And that got me started. That praise that I got from her, and I got praise from my parents, well, from my mother, got praise from my mom, got encouragement from my sister, and I started buying spiral notebooks and 19-cent Bic pens at the department store, and I would sit home and I would just write story after story after story after story, and I did this for years. It got to where my grandfather, God bless him, he gave me a manual Underwood typewriter in 1972. And my mother would bring me home reams of paper, and I just started pounding these things out on a manual typewriter. And anyway, one thing leads to another. I kind of got out of that, started dabbling in poetry because I was, by today's standards, I guess you would have called me an emo. I was very emo in my mid-teens. So everything was about poetry and emoting and all this, right?
Hey,
And
nothing wrong with that. I went through an
well,
emo
let's,
phase too.
yeah, well, I grew out of it, okay. But
I didn't. I'm just
I
kidding. Go ahead.
I joined the Navy, and because I needed to get out of my little small town, East Texas town. I never really fit in there. Um, when I was a kid, kids at 12, 13, 14 years old, they were learning how to run electrical in houses. They were learning how to build stuff. They were under the hood of cars with their dads or their granddads up to their elbows in axle grease and stuff. Not me. I was writing. I was reading. I mean, 13 years old, and I was reading Stephen King novels. I just pulled in everything. I read all kinds of classical literature, just all this stuff. So I didn't fit in. I was a square peg, round. And I wanted to go to college, but I didn't have the money. And the old man made it very clear that if I wanted college, I had to do that on my own. He wasn't gonna stand in my way, but he wasn't gonna help me either. I had to do that on my own. And 1979, 1980, um, the the college finance assistance industry as it is now did not exist then. There were Pell Grants. They were called something back then, but they were Pell Grants. And you could do work study programs and that kind of stuff. But I didn't know how to take the first step on any of that. And so my senior year, I started getting all these letters from the military. And I go in and talk to the Marines, and they look at my ASVAB scores. My ASVAB scores were way high for that time. They were off the charts. And I go in to talk to the Marines, and they start talking about, heavy motor transport and air crew and this and that and the other, which all sounded okay. But at the time, I had this thing where I thought I wanted to be a doctor. And I had done really well in high school chemistry and biology and math and all that kind of stuff. And so I kept asking him, well, I want to know about your medical careers. And they kept going, well, let me tell you about this and this and that. And they kept going back to it. And finally I said, look, I said, the only thing I'm interested in is uh, a job in the medical field. And the poor staff sergeant, he finally just, his shoulders kind of sag and he says, I don't have anything like that for you. We don't have an enlisted medical. And I said, well, what do you guys do when you get sick or when you get shot or whatever? And he says, well, the Navy corpsmen take care of us. And I said, Navy what? And he had to explain to me what it was. And I said, so if I join the Navy and I become a Navy Hospital Corpsman, I can go to another school and then help you guys, go to the field with you guys. And he said, yeah, that's how it works. And I said, okay, see ya. Walked right next door into the Navy recruiter and essentially signed up and went to basic corps school, spent some time stateside, went to a small island in 1989, a small island called Diego Garcia. It's in the Indian Ocean. It's of strategic importance to us if we need to get military supplies into Southern Asia, Southwest Asia, the Middle East, because you can sail northward right out of the Indian Ocean and suddenly you're in the Arabian Sea. You can get into the Red Sea. You can get into the Straits of Hormuz. You can go into the Gulf of Aden. You can get all these places that have been, real hot spots for the last few decades, right? And I was there for a year on this tiny island. And when I came back stateside, I went to field med school, which is where you learn to be a battlefield medic, a battlefield corpsman with the Marines. You
Oh,
have to
so
go to
this
a
is
special.
this is when you start dealing with the medically accurate violence you were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I'd seen some stuff
Hmm.
uh, in these earlier years in my career, but I went to that school, and a lot of it, honest to God, a lot of it is just reviewing your emergency care. They just call it combat casualty care, but it's the same thing. Dealing with sucking chest wounds, eviscerated bowels, traumatic amputations, you know, arterial bleeding, all that, all the base, what is for me basic stuff. How do you deal with that? How do you keep a person alive long enough to medevac them the hell out? You
Right.
know, they may die, but you don't want them dying in front of you.
Hmm.
You want to get them out. And so that's what the school taught you. And then you learn the small unit tactics. You learn how to fire your pistol. You learn how to fire the rifle, and they give you a K-bar, and which is a Marine Corps combat knife. And they show you a few things and how it can be creatively used.
Hmm.
And then you graduate from the school. And I graduated in April of 1990. And then in August of 1990, a fellow by the name of Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait.
I'm familiar.
And in November of 1990, I was boots on the ground. And that was an interesting thing. We
Yeah, that.
we 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 went a few places and we did a few things.
Mhm.
Coming out of the war, um, I went and got some more training, and then to become what's called an independent duty corpsman. That's a corpsman that is so highly trained. You can send them into a forward deployed place or a combat uh, collection company. And these are places that are too dangerous to send doctors because doctors are too expensive. It takes too much to recruit them, train them, and then pay them to keep them in so they don't resign their commissions and get out and go make the real money, right? And but with a independent duty corpsman, 3 of us could die, and it would be about the same amount of money lost as if they lost 1 doctor.
Mm-hmm.
We were about 3 to 1, so we were cheap labor, and to a certain degree, we were expendable.
Yep.
Now, people in the military, if you were to talk to them as a civilian, they'll never tell you that, okay? Because that's not politically correct, and it's not the kind of PR that the military wants to give civilian people.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
but you know, and I can understand that, but hey, that's the truth. We were expendable. So anyway, I get to as I'm going through my later years in the military, I come to a point where I decided I need to get back to the things that made me happy when I was a kid. And what made me happy as a kid was writing.
Lovely.
But I wanted to write screenplays because I saw Basic Instinct and I thought it sucked.
What a way to be inspired.
I thought it sucked. And it's nothing against Sharon Stone, nothing against Michael Douglas, nothing against any of the people in it.
They do listen to this podcast, so watch out.
Okay. But the story itself just it just wasn't there.
Mm-hmm.
In my opinion, my never to be humble opinion, it just wasn't there. And it just pissed me off. And the next day I went to a store in Oceanside, California, found a book on screenwriting and bought it. And, started writing.
That's how a lot of writers get started, right? They read something and they go like, I feel like I could do this a little bit better, right? But yeah, then you realize how the industry actually works. Sometimes you don't have to be a good writer at a certain point to make a movie, right?
Yeah, but it went from there, and I wound up getting back into horror, hardcore horror. And I've gotten a couple of movies made. I directed one, wrote and produced another. I've sold a few scripts that have not been made into movies. I've got one that's in post that I wrote that's in post now, but hasn't been released yet. And so,
when
but
is that going to be released?
Don't know yet.
We don't know. Okay.
They haven't told me yet. I'm just the writer, so I don't know.
Well, how about this? Once we do have a release date for that, and I know you're working on another book, once you're planning on releasing that as well, you can come back on the show and we can talk about that.
I'd love to.